Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you enjoyed the Turkish Grand Prix. It was alright-ish, maybe, kind of. Yeah, it happened. And yeah, it was a bit soggy, a bit humid, and everybody started on the intermediate tyres, and it looked like it was going to be one of those races, few drivers out of position, Hamilton taking a 10th-place penalty, Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo starting from the back. It was like, ooh, this could get very spicy, couldn't it? Maybe it could get dry towards the end of the race, and just never quite happened. It never dried up quite enough, did it? Usually with intermediate tyres and 20 Formula 1 cars rattling around, drying up the track with the spray, usually we'd get to the point at the end where there's like one dry line, and those few brave drivers would go onto the soft tyres and absolutely go for it with the last 10 laps. But it never quite dried enough, and obviously so humid that the water just sort of hung in the air and fell back down on the track. And what we ended up with was something that was incredibly greasy. If you're Sebastian Vettel, you probably know that more than anybody, but it was very, very greasy in the end, and we didn't quite get that stint where we could get some soft compound tyres on. So what I thought I'd talk to you about today is, again, I'm going to do a one-word review. I just really enjoyed the one-word review last week. I really enjoyed making it, and I think you guys enjoyed it as well. So let me know in the comments down below if you enjoy the one-word review. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up with the Turkish Grand Prix final grid, starting with Mazepin. And my word for Mazepin is I don't really know what happened to Nikita Mazepin. It was another one of those drives where he was sort of so far at the back that nobody really paid much attention to him. There was one very funny incident, obviously, with the blue flags and Hamilton, harked back to the Nikita Mazepin of the Spanish and Portuguese Grand Prix, where he just ignores blue flags, and he did it again for just a couple of corners, which made me smile when Lewis Hamilton was trying to sieve his way through the grid. But apart from that, bit of a non-plus performance for Nikita Mazepin. Mick Schumacher, on the other hand, I've gone for the word spark, because qualification just showed that tiny little spark for me that Mick Schumacher could have something special. I know that we're talking about a Formula 2 champion, and I know he is a Schumacher. We can't jump to conclusions too quickly. We can't put that much pressure on him, but he just showed a little bit for me where I was like, ooh, there's something going on here, and he's just made that Haas get into Q2, and I'm excited for Mick Schumacher in the future, and I'm hoping that obviously he can get a car underneath him that can give him a little bit more pace in the future as well. But very, very impressed with Mick Schumacher, especially in qualifying this weekend. Sebastian Vettel 18th, and I've gone for risky. They went for the risky strategy. They went onto the medium compound tyres with about 20 laps to go, and nearly hit every single wall out there. It was just much too slippery for the medium compound tyres. Even though there was a sort of greasy, dryy sort of line, they could never get any temperature into the tyres, and that was the real thing. The temperature in the tyres is so important, otherwise the tyres aren't sticky and they just slide all over the place. And we saw that with Sebastian Vettel, even in the pit lane, nearly hitting the wall. So risky from Sebastian Vettel, but not quite there. Although I did really like his helmet. Latifi, I've gone for persistent. Like, Latifi is persistently in and around 16th, 17th place, isn't he, Latifi? And it was another one of those drives that was pretty good from him, but nothing amazing to talk about either. Although Alonso, the man in front of him, I've gone for uncharacteristic, because it was weird seeing Alonso not gain places on the first lap of a Grand Prix. He just seems to always get it right. Like, I'm thinking all the way back to probably Silverstone this year, where he had an amazing sprint qualifying performance, and we were like, Fernando Alonso knows what he's doing here, doesn't he? Like, he's really turned it on in the second half of the season, and it was just a bit uncharacteristic. Collided with Gasly. I know that Gasly took the fault for that, but honestly, I think it was a bit 50-50, especially with Sergio Perez around the outside as well. Yeah, it was one of those things, and obviously came into blows with Mick later on lap 1 as well, so ruined Mick Schumacher's possibility of battling in the midfield for a little bit longer. Yeah, uncharacteristic from Alonso, a bit nonplussed, especially considering I thought, oh, maybe he could go and get himself a podium here. Really good qualifying performance from him in mixed conditions. And I thought mixed conditions on a Sunday is going to suit Alonso, the wily old Alonso. He knows his way around this kind of track, but just didn't quite come together for him. Possibly a little bit of damage in there as well. That 5-second penalty, yeah, it just didn't happen for him. George Russell, another sort of mixed weekend from him. Pretty good in qualifying, but a tough race. Started in a very awkward position in the pack, and again had to sort of battle with those midfieldy cars. Can't really remember too much going on for George Russell, but a tough weekend for him, and I'm sure he'll come back better next time out. Yuki Tsunoda, gone for slippery, although maybe a little bit harsh. You know, he did give Hamilton a really, really good race at one point. Sort of the first 15 or so laps, Lewis Hamilton was really struggling to get past Yuki Tsunoda, and Tsunoda's defensive work was really, really good, considering he had a Mercedes and a 7-time world champion behind him. But then there was a couple of errors as the race continued on. Obviously, he did have a spin as well, did Yuki Tsunoda, so it just didn't quite come together. I thought he was going to get points, you know, a really good Q3 performance, a great start to the race, and then it just sort of fell apart towards the end. Yuki Tsunoda just needs to get everything together all in one race. You know, sometimes it's qualifying outside of the top 15 even, and then it's, you know, in the race being okay but only being able to get up to about 12th, or dropping down and getting muddled up with the Hasses and the Williamses. And Yuki Tsunoda just needs one weekend where it all comes together. He needs a little bit of confidence in himself. He can take little sparks of confidence from this weekend, but I'd love to see Yuki Tsunoda in the points at least one more time before the season ends. Daniel Ricciardo in 13th place. I've gone for realistic. I think with the McLaren struggling, with the fact that he was starting at the back of the grid, you know, poor qualifying from him again. 13th place, fairly realistic considering the race overall, yes. Obviously, he went early with the pit stop, and there was at one point where I was like, oh, if he comes onto intermediate tyres and this works out for him and suddenly he's like 5 or 6 seconds quicker than everybody else, could we see some sort of shock Daniel Ricciardo like jump up into the top 5? But never really happened for him, did it? You know, he just isn't quite there with this McLaren yet, especially when there is a track where the McLaren isn't up to scratch. You know, Lando Norris, we'll talk about him in a little while, but still managed to get it up into the points. Daniel Ricciardo, not quite there, although did start from the back of the race, so maybe a little bit harsh from me. Then we have the 2 Alfa Romeos just outside the points. I've gone for Raikkonen as a smooth race. No issues really, fairly happy with his finish, and, you know, apart from his water braking in FP3, a fairly smooth weekend overall for Raikkonen. Pretty consistent now, isn't it? Just the old timer. Winding down his time in Formula 1. Giovinazzi, though, I've gone for this is just classic Giovinazzi, because in a race where it is mixed weather conditions, it is slippery. There are drivers spinning all over the place. There are possible accidents coming, and just nothing ever went Giovinazzi's way. He just needed one of those drivers in the top 10 to have any kind of issue or any kind of spin or any kind of collision. Any kind of safety car as well would have probably put Giovinazzi up into the points, but just didn't quite happen for him. And it's classic Giovinazzi that he is the one that is in 11th place in a race like this, where we probably wouldn't expect all 20 drivers to finish, and all 20 drivers did. And it's just Giovinazzi all over that, isn't it? Ocon, though, the man in 10th. Let's take a minute to talk about Ocon, because what a drive that was. I've gone for stint as my word for Ocon, because it was a 58-lap stint, an entire race stint on those intermediate tyres for Ocon. That's right, he did a 0-stop race. A 0-stop race around Turkey. Absolutely amazing stuff. I mean, those tyres towards the end of the race were awful. Like, he was losing 5 seconds a lap to Giovinazzi over the last couple of laps, but to go 58 laps on those intermediate tyres and for them not to just absolutely disintegrate and blow up in your face was really, really impressive from Ocon. Managed to do the whole race on that set of intermediate tyres, and well deserved that point, because that is just a sensational piece of driving from Ocon. Stroll in front of him as well, got 9th place, and I'm glad for Stroll. He needed points, and I've said points as my word for Lance Stroll, because so important for him to pick up points, so important for Aston Martin to pick up points, because, you know, Yuki Tsunoda has like one standout race, suddenly Lance Stroll is behind him in the Drivers' Championship, and that really can't happen for him this season. He does not want to be behind Yuki Tsunoda. He needs to pick up those points more consistently, and Aston Martin need to have one driver in the points pretty much every race if they can, and Stroll managed to do it for them this weekend. Carlos Sainz in 8th place. Amazing drive from Carlos Sainz. Just makes you wonder if he wasn't starting from the back of the grid where he could have been, because he was phenomenal. Middle of the race, he was putting in fastest lap after fastest lap, and I was like stunned by Carlos Sainz, absolutely cutting his way through the field, getting past everybody, made getting past pretty much every driver on the grid look easy. He was wonderful, so many overtakes, and obviously ended up getting driver of the day, and more than deserved that driver of the day. Really, really impressive from Carlos Sainz, getting back up into the points. And in a Ferrari that looked pretty good at the Turkey track, hopefully he can, continue that form a little bit. Obviously, he has a few podiums this season, possibly one more between now and the end of the year would be quite nice. Lando Norris, his ex-teammate, just in front of him in 7th place. And as I sort of said with Ricciardo, the McLaren was terrible, so I've just gone for good for Lando Norris. The fact that he was able to just hold on to 7th place, didn't let anybody behind him catch up too much, got himself a nice bit of track and just sort of did 58 laps pretty much on his own, did Lando Norris. He was fairly happy with that. It's a good drive. And again, just picking up some points, keeping himself nicely situated in the Drivers' Championship. Gasly, though, in front of him, I've gone for finally being rewarded for consistently qualifying in and amongst those top 5 or 6. Finally getting a race that isn't, unlucky, or AlphaTauri just get it completely wrong, or he comes into collision with McLaren, which happens fairly often this season. Like, Gasly finally being rewarded. I know he got that 5-second penalty for the collision with Alonso. I think that was a little bit harsh, to be honest with you. Perez sort of squeezed him into Alonso. Didn't have too many places to go there, did Gasly, but AlphaTauri finally back on track. Terrible in Italy for them. The sprint qualifying, obviously Gasly with that collision, and then didn't really start the race. I know he did start the race, but didn't really start the race in Italy. And then in Russia, they just got everything wrong. Gasly looked fairly decent on the defensive in Russia, but again, outside the points and not happy with his team at the end. But finally rewarded is Gasly, and a 6th place finish overall. Hamilton then is the one everybody wants me to talk about. Hamilton in 5th place, and I've gone for tyres as my word. And people are so 50-50 on this. I'd love to know your opinion in the comments down below. Should Hamilton have pitted? In my opinion, I think he did the right thing following the team's orders. It was another masterclass from Hamilton. He drove really, really well. And as I said before, only Yuki Tsunoda really gave him any kind of issue. But Lewis Hamilton was great on track. And I just think he possibly could have pushed those intermediate tyres a little bit too far. I know we saw Ocon do 58 laps on them, but Ocon's tyres by the end of the race were shot to pieces, and Ocon was not putting the lap times that Lewis Hamilton was at the beginning of the race into those tyres. I think, we could have seen almost like a Verstappen incident at Azerbaijan where those tyres just completely gave out towards the end of the race for Lewis Hamilton. And I think, he's got to trust Mercedes. Lots of people saying, he should have trusted his own instincts, his own gut, but Mercedes will have looked at it. They'd have looked at the strategy. They'd have been continually updating their strategy throughout the race, and probably would have ended up 5th anyway if those tries would have dropped off as much as I think they would have. Lewis Hamilton ended up 5th. It's overall pretty good. Maybe he'll be a little bit disappointed because it did look like he was going to pick up a podium at one point, but as I said, those tyres, he was putting so much pressure on those tyres early on in the race, and to go all the way with them would have been such a big risk. And let's be honest, this is the team that has won him so many world championships continually over the last few years. Like, he's got to have some trust in that team, and I think the team probably did the best thing they could. Charles Leclerc, I've gone for gutted. I really wanted to see Charles Leclerc on the podium this time out. Just lost out in the end to Perez, and looked dead on the set of new intermediate tyres. I know, again, probably couldn't have gone all the way to the end on the first set of intermediate tyres, but just looked dead and buried. Really couldn't get those new intermediate tyres up to temperature towards the end of the race, and struggled. We've seen him locking up down that back straight so many times, and yeah, Sergio Perez eventually caught him up, overtook him, and Charles Leclerc did well to finish up in 4th. It's a good points haul for Ferrari, but just so close to that podium, and I'd love to see him pick up a podium before the end of the season. Sergio Perez in 3rd place. I've gone for better. This is what we want to see from Sergio Perez. It was a really good drive from him. Made the tyres work for him, as he always does. It wasn't the best of qualifying. We never get amazing qualifying pace from Sergio Perez, but really, really good. And he needs to pick up these podiums for Red Bull. If Red Bull are going to get anywhere near Mercedes in the Constructors, needs to pick them up, and he did well to do that today. Verstappen, obviously, I've gone for safe. as my word. And maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but I don't think they tried anything out of the box to try and get the win here this weekend. Maybe they were just happy with second place. And to be fair, Valtteri Bottas looked very, very good, but pretty safe from Verstappen and didn't go for the win overly. Obviously, tried to catch up to Bottas a little bit towards the middle of the race, but never looked like he was going to really, trouble Bottas. Never looked like anyone behind him was going to trouble him. So just a fairly safe and consistent second place, and he'll love the fact that he's taken the lead in the Drivers' Championship back. And Bottas, our final driver to talk about, finally gets that first victory, and that's my word, victory for Bottas. Thank goodness me. He needed a win in his final season at Mercedes, a well-deserved win. He's been such a good servant to Mercedes over the years, and could have won so many more races, so many he's given over to Hamilton over those years, but I hope this isn't his last win. I hope he can, maybe pick up one more at Mercedes, but this could very well be his last win in Formula One as he moves over to Alfa Romeo next year. And I'm glad he got one more win, one more, podium to celebrate and the top step. And it was just lovely to see him there. But let's have a look at the driver standings after the race. Then Max Verstappen does take the lead back from Lewis Hamilton, 6 points between them. Again, when it swings, it doesn't swing by much, does it? And Lewis Hamilton could easily make up those 6 points next time out and take the lead back from him. It is going to go all the way down to the wire, isn't it, between those two? Bottas got a 32-point lead over Norris now. I think that pretty much consolidates Bottas as third in the Drivers' Championship. It's going to be massive for Norris to swing 32 points his way with just 6 races left to go. And then the other thing that's sort of looking very, very tasty indeed is 6th and 7th. Carlos Sainz, 0.5 points ahead of Charles Leclerc. That Ferrari sort of top driver seat is looking very, very close indeed for next year. I have no idea who's going to come out on top at the end of this season. I'd love to know your opinions. Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc, who do you reckon is going to come out on top? Because Charles Leclerc, obviously, much more experience in Ferrari, but Carlos Sainz just keeps doing it. Just keeps turning up, keeps getting those points, and has managed to keep himself in 6th place. Ricciardo will be a little bit disappointed. Obviously, lost a bit of ground to the Ferraris in front of him. Still got time to maybe catch them, although it's going to be very tricky to swing 21 points his way. Gasly did really well, actually, consolidating himself as the best of the rest. I was sort of worried that this would be the weekend that Ocon and Alonso would really start to jump up towards Gasly, but it was a good drive from Gasly, got some really good points. Obviously, Alonso ditched it and ended up towards the back, so didn't get any points on Ocon, only picked up 1. So Gasly just holding on to that best of the rest spot. Let's pop onto the constructors very, very quickly. We've got Mercedes still at the top and Red Bull, obviously. They picked up a comparable amount of points with Bottas getting the win and then obviously 2 Red Bulls on the podium in their wonderful livery, actually. I haven't mentioned the Red Bull livery. It was very, very nice indeed. But again, where it's hotting up is in 3rd place with McLaren and Ferrari. Ferrari eke back towards McLaren a little bit this weekend, just 7.5 points behind the McLaren team. So be interesting again, who is going to come out on top between those two. So many races left to go and so many twists and turns for that 3rd place yet to come. AlphaTauri and basically Gasly managed to get himself closer to the Alpines in 5th. Personally, I think the Alpines are probably going to end up in 5th place because Yuki Tsunoda just isn't going to get the points haul required to drag AlphaTauri up towards Alpine, and Aston Martin a bit dead and buried in 7th place. I think they're too far behind AlphaTauri at this point and too far ahead of Williams. So Aston Martin are pretty much guaranteed that 7th place in the Constructors Championship. But that's everything I've got to say about the Turkish Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. If you could leave a like, subscribe, so on and so forth. We've got a couple of videos coming out before the US Grand Prix in a couple of weekends' time, and obviously we will be live for the United States Grand Prix. It's a late one for me. Hopefully you guys on the US side will be up and ready for it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.